Hello, and welcome to the Geopolitics Explained podcast. On Monday, we discussed the key points from the UK budget of last week, including the policies that were presented and how they will affect different groups within the UK. Today, we're going to expand this review into the effect on UK politics. Is the UK set to improve its current position that's marked by stagnating growth, declining productivity, and low debt market confidence? Or are these issues now ingrained? Firstly, I want to discuss some of the positive aspects of this budget. The abolishment of the two-child benefit cap will benefit 560,000 families and will bring 450,000 children out of poverty. Every single child in the UK and in the world deserves access to necessities such as food, water, shelter, and heat. If the UK is to escape from its current stagnation, it is the generations of tomorrow that will work towards this, and improving their future prospects is a vital pursuit that, in my opinion, should be celebrated. The abolishing of the two-child benefit cap is seen as a largely negative policy change in the UK. 60% of people polled in July 2023 were against abolishing the two-child limit. If people don't understand what it's like to be in a position where their children don't have access to necessities such as food and heat, then they're more likely to cast this aside as not an issue related to them. Greater empathy moving forward would help here, but this looks unlikely, with this being a politically fragmenting issue. Labour also isn't helped by the fact that this was a U-turn, but fewer children being in poverty is a massive positive. The continued build-out of nuclear power is also welcomed. The UK saw oil and gas from the North Sea peak in the late 1990s, and since then the UK's energy sector has needed to change due to its decline in energy security. The war in Ukraine has highlighted how energy can be weaponised in our world, where hybrid conflict is on the rise. As a result, nations have to be more self-sufficient, otherwise they risk being vulnerable to such weaponisation. Nuclear power is one such way that energy security can be improved, albeit still being susceptible to uranium supply or alternative fuels such as thorium. On the energy front, the government also announced limited oil and gas extraction in the existing North Sea fields. The reality is that over 75% of energy consumption last year came from fossil fuels, and as a result, they are still necessary in day-to-day life. In coming decades, this may shift, but for today, we need to face this reality. This policy shift will also work to improve energy security in the UK, which will bring costs down. Speaking of reducing costs, and the reduction of around £150 per year on energy bills, if passed on to consumers, is another positive aspect of this budget. Energy prices still remain elevated in comparison to the start of the energy crisis in 2022 as a result of the onset of the Russia-Ukraine war. While these policies offer some relief to specific areas of the UK, for most people, their impact is limited. The biggest policy shift is the freezing of tax thresholds for an extra 3 years. Many voters will look at their bank balance at the end of the month and they will see less. If this reduction in monthly income isn't immediately noticeable, it will be more noticeable after a few years of inflation has further eroded purchasing power. This ultimately contributes to quality of life in the UK stagnating. This stagnation translates to everyday lives. Necessities such as food and shelter grow in cost at a faster pace than wages. As a result of this stagnation, citizens naturally want change because they see themselves as worse off than in the past. This is typically seen in political voting patterns because these citizens want change, and political change is one way that they can control this. So let's now explore the political impacts of this budget. The Labour Party have, in some ways, botched their strategy since being elected in July of 2024. Their campaign's central theme was one of change. Now, this, of course, takes time, but today there are few visible signs of this change in reality. The UK budget had subtle digs at other parties, such as Zach Polanski of the Greens, Nigel Farage of Reform, and the previous 14 years of Conservative leadership. When Labour were voted into power, many hoped that part of their change strategy would see the UK move away from childish politics and towards genuine change. The environment in the House of Commons during the budget was like a playground, and this hope for change away from an environment of childish politics clearly hasn't unfolded in reality in the UK. As for addressing stagnation in the UK, and the hope that Labour would have been the answer for the change that many citizens are seeking, this has not quite been reflected in the reality of people's everyday lives. Now, this isn't my opinion. This hope for change and the lack of it being reflected in people's everyday lives is seen in political approval ratings. Prime Minister Keir Starmer's net favourability rating currently sits at minus 54%, while the Chancellor Rachel Reeves has a net favourability rating of minus 57%. A net favourability rating is the percentage of those polled who have a favourable view of a person, minus those who have an unfavourable view. This means that a negative net favourability rating indicates that more people hold an unfavourable view of a person versus a favourable view. So, is this just a Labour isolated issue? Well, the approval ratings seem to indicate that this isn't just isolated for the Labour Party. Of the other party leaders, Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch of Reform and the Conservatives both have net favourability ratings of minus 32. The Greens, your party, and the Liberal Democrats all see their leaders also possess net negative approval ratings. So this could be an issue that has just arisen recently, but it also doesn't seem this way. Of the recent former Prime Ministers, Liz Truss had a minus 70 net favourability rating, and Rishi Sunak recorded a minus 57 net favourability rating during the 2024 election campaign. Now, I don't want to hinge this entire analysis on approval ratings, but I do believe they act as a good proxy for public attitude towards politics, political parties, and political leaders. Labour does have more years in Parliament to turn this around and to pursue visible change, but this trend is worrying, and the current environment in the UK is against them. This lack of political support for any political leader in the UK is a consequence of the UK's financial reality and its geopolitical position. It's this that is eroding the quality of life in the UK. This economic and quality of life unhappiness is ultimately reflected in political attitudes because this is one of the only ways that citizens have control over their voice being heard. Labour has a tough job in attempting to please everybody while being limited by the economic reality in the UK. Unfortunately, this being a tough job doesn't change the reality of the UK's economic and political situation, and that something needs to be done with a long-term focus to address this. In 2022, when Liz Truss included unfunded tax cuts and boosts to spending in her 2022 budget, the bond market grew unstable. As a result, the bond market requires an intricate balancing act, and this continues to limit the UK economically and politically. Next episode, which will come out on Tuesday, we will explore if there is any way for the UK to escape these political and economic structural limitations. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this episode, why not leave a review on the podcast platform of your choice? It really helps out the podcast and I greatly appreciate it. I've been Dylan, and I'll talk to you next time.